Starting with updates from the Israel-Hamas war, the Israel Defense Forces, or IDF, have said an airstrike killed a senior Hamas leader in the Gaza Strip. The IDF says Osama Mazini has been eliminated. He was reportedly a key hostage negotiator for Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said that victory in Gaza will take time. In a speech to the Israeli parliament, he also issued a warning to Iran and Lebanon's Hezbollah. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Don't test us on the northern border." Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah have been exchanging fire across the Lebanon-Israel border for days. Nearly 300 soldiers have been killed and at least 199 were being held hostage in Gaza. This is ever since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th. A spokesperson for the Israel Defense Forces announced this during a briefing to reporters. The spokesperson also accused Iran of ordering Hezbollah to attack the Lebanon-Israel border on Sunday. Thousands of Palestinians desperate to leave Gaza gathered at the Rafah border crossing on Monday. Rafah is on the border between Gaza and Egypt's Sinai Peninsula. This is the only Gaza crossing that's not controlled by Israel. Earlier on Monday, security sources in Egypt said a ceasefire had been reached to allow people to leave Gaza and aid to be let in. However, Israeli officials later said that there was no truce. U.S. President Joe Biden will visit Israel on Wednesday. This was announced by U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Blinken added that the U.S. and Israel have agreed to develop a plan to get humanitarian aid to Gaza without benefiting Hamas. He made the announcement after 9 hours of negotiations with Netanyahu. Earlier on Monday, Blinken had returned to Israel after his West Asia trip. He visited several countries including Qatar, Jordan and Egypt. This was to carry out diplomatic talks with these countries to prevent a wider war from erupting as a result of the Israel-Hamas conflict. An Iranian official has said that the U.S. is heavily involved in the conflict between Israel and Hamas. He added that the U.S. must also be held accountable for the recent Israel-Hamas war. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says that American warships and jets in the region aren't a provocation but a deterrence. UN Aid Chief Martin Griffiths will travel to Cairo today. This is for negotiations on getting aid into the blockaded Gaza Strip. Griffiths said his office was in deep discussions with Israel, Egypt and others. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has called for a humanitarian corridor to be opened into Gaza. Trudeau said urgent help was needed to address the increasingly dire situation. He added that Canada fully supported Israel's right to defend itself in accordance with international law. Separately, Canada has advised its citizens to leave Lebanon because of heightened security risks in the region. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has announced the launch of a humanitarian air bridge operation to Egypt. This will consist of several flights to bring supplies to Gaza. Von der Leyen said that the first 2 flights will be sent this week. Reports say German Chancellor Olaf Scholz will visit Israel and Egypt today. This is following his meeting with Jordan's King Abdullah in Berlin. This comes as Western nations try to prevent the Israel-Hamas conflict from spreading. Scholz said, and I quote, "The point is to be in constant dialogue with everyone and prevent such escalation." A resolution calling for a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has failed to pass in the UN Security Council. The resolution was drafted by Russia. The country proposed the 1-page draft text last Friday. It also called for the release of hostages, humanitarian aid access, and the safe evacuation of civilians in need. French Foreign Minister Catherine Colonna has called for the protection of journalists reporting on the Israel-Hamas war. She has asked both sides to respect the rights of the media. At least 15 journalists have been killed so far in the ongoing conflict. Several hundred people protested outside BBC's headquarters in London on Monday. They called for the broadcaster to describe Hamas as a terrorist organization in its reporting. The protesters shouted the word shame while waving Israeli flags. BBC previously issued a statement on its use of language. The company said its reporters do not use the term as it implies taking sides in the conflict. Jewish people in Washington, D.C. gathered around the White House to call for a ceasefire in Gaza. The protesters urged U.S. President Joe Biden to listen to the Jewish community in the United States. They asked for a de-escalation in the conflict. Former U.S. President Donald Trump has said that if re-elected, he will bar immigrants who support Hamas from entering America. He said this during one of his campaign rallies in the U.S. state of Iowa. Trump also said he would set up travel bans for what he called travel-plagued countries. However, he did not say how he plans to achieve any of this. In other political news, Russian President Vladimir Putin has arrived in Beijing for the Belt and Road Summit. During this visit, Putin will also hold bilateral talks with Chinese President Xi Jinping. This is Putin's second trip since the International Criminal Court issued an arrest warrant for him in March. Two Swedish people were shot dead in Belgium's capital, Brussels, in a suspected terrorist attack. The gunman identified himself as a member of the Islamic State. A massive manhunt is on to catch the suspect. The shooting happened near a stadium where Belgium and Sweden were playing a football match. UN aid coordinator Daniel Peter Endres says the people of Afghanistan are in urgent need of shelter. Their existing houses are not earthquake-proof and the people are afraid to go back. 3 powerful earthquakes have hit Afghanistan in the last 10 days. According to the UN, over 43,000 Afghans have been affected by the earthquakes. The Supreme Court of India delivered its much-anticipated judgment on pleas seeking the legality of same-sex marriages in the country. The Supreme Court has refused to grant constitutional validity to same-sex marriages by a 3-2 majority. No constitutional or fundamental rights have been given to civil unions. The Supreme Court said the government's high-powered committee will examine concerns of the same-sex couples. The court also did not provide rights for queer couples to jointly adopt. The 5-judge bench heard pleas in the case in May this year. Moving on to sports, the focus is on the ICC Men's Cricket World Cup 2023. Australia have claimed their first win, reviving their World Cup campaign. Australia beat Sri Lanka by 5 wickets at Lucknow's Ekana Stadium. The win for the Aussies comes after 2 successive defeats against India in the opener and then against South Africa. Despite a promising start, the Sri Lankan team failed to maintain their momentum. The batting lineup collapsed against Australia. They were bowled out for 209 in 43.3 overs. This was a significant drop from the initial partnership of 125 runs for the opening wicket. After that partnership, Sri Lanka lost all 10 wickets for just 86 runs. Despite half-centuries by Kushal Perera and Pathum Nissanka, Sri Lanka failed to put up its target of a 300-plus score. Australia's Adam Zampa, with his leg break googly, delivered when his team needed him the most. The leg spinner claimed 4 wickets against Sri Lanka. Zampa got rid of the in-form Kusal Mendes, but the wicket actually belonged to David Warner, who ran across from deep mid-wicket, covering about 25 metres to complete a spectacular diving catch. Samara Vikrama, Karunaratne and Theeksana were Zampa's other wickets. Pat Cummins, who has been far from his best with the ball, also stood up at the opportune moment. He gave Australia the breakthrough they needed as he cramped Nissanka for room. The Sri Lankan hit it high in front of square only for Warner to run and take a stunning catch. 5 overs later, the Australian skipper cleaned up the other set batter, Pereira, who picked up the wrong line to swing his bat. This dismissal marked the beginning of Australia's dominance as the Sri Lankan batting unravelled. Australian pacer Mitchell Starc kept up his record of taking at least a wicket in every World Cup match he has played in. He took 2 against Sri Lanka as he bowled both Dhananjaya De Silva and Lahiru Kumara in 21 World Cup matches. Starc has 54 wickets, boasting an outstanding average of 15 World Cups. Defending a below-par total, Dilshan Madhushankar bowled a fiery first spell. It included a maiden over and a double-wicket maiden, where he dismissed both David Warner and Steve Smith. Warner immediately called for a review after he was given out by the field umpire. The DRS, however, ruled in favour of the on-field umpire. 23-year-old Madhushankar, who played just his 9th ODI and first World Cup, took 3 wickets for 38 against the Aussies. While the bowlers delivered a stellar performance, Josh Inglis, Mitchell Starc and Marnus Labuschagne did the heavy lifting with the bat. Marsh put 52 on the board of 51 balls. He smashed 3 boundaries to plunder 12 runs of young spinner Dunith Welalage in the 9th over. Marsh raced to his half-century, but then Karunaratne, the Lankan right-arm medium-fast pacer, sent him back to the pavilion. He sent a sharp throw from the deep to end Marsh's innings as wicketkeeper Kushal Mendes collected to the ball and stumped him. Putting 58 on the board, Josh Inglis scored his maiden World Cup 50. Playing only his 2nd World Cup game, Inglis looked confident in the middle. He stitched a 77-run partnership with Marnus Labuschagne as Australia crossed the 200-run mark for the first time at this World Cup. Inglis was dismissed in the 33rd over by Welalage. Australia overhauled the target set by Sri Lanka in just 35.2 overs, giving a solid boost to their net run rate. The Aussies rose to the 8th position on the World Cup points table with their first win of the tournament. Meanwhile, the loss severely dented Sri Lanka's chances of progressing to the semis. Sri Lanka are in 9th place with defeats in all 3 games so far. Unbeaten South Africa will look to extend their winning streak as they face the Netherlands at the picturesque HPCA Stadium in Dharamshala. The 2 points will see South Africa back at the top of the standings in the league stage. The Proteas registered a massive 102-run win against Sri Lanka in their opener. In their next game, they thrashed the Aussies, winning by 134 runs. The Netherlands, on the other hand, have been winless in the tournament so far.